You know that awkward feeling when you realize someone your age is quietly way ahead of you financially, and you cannot quite figure out what they are doing differently, even though on paper you kind of make the same money? It almost feels like they were handed a secret instruction manual when you were not, right? Tonight, I want to show you that manual. And in this video, I want to walk you through the wealth blueprint that most rich families quietly follow, even if they never sit down and explain it out loud. Once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it, and it is going to change the way you think about every dollar that hits your bank account. Because here is the weird part. You probably already know how to save a little. You know you should invest. You know debt is bad in large amounts, but it still feels like you are running on a treadmill. You work, you pay bills, maybe you put something into savings, then something goes wrong, and boom, you are back to zero. So if you are doing the right things, why does it still feel so fragile? Rich families are not smarter than you, and they are not necessarily working harder than you. The difference is that at some point, they stopped playing defense and started following a system that quietly turns every year into a step up. It is not one magic stock, not one lucky break, and not just starting a business. It is this boring but powerful blueprint that makes money behave differently for them than it does for everyone else. And once you understand it, you can start following it even if you are starting from negative. So let us start with step one of the blueprint, the one most people never get past. Rich families think about money in terms of systems, not goals. Most people say things like, I want to save $10,000, or I want to be debt-free. That sounds responsible, but it keeps you in survival mode. Because the second you hit the goal, your brain relaxes, life happens, and you slide backwards. Rich families ask a different question. They ask, how do we design our life so that saving, investing, and protection happen automatically whether we feel motivated or not? Imagine two people making the same income. One treats money like a series of emergencies and wishes. The other treats money like a factory. That factory takes in every paycheck and, without emotion, sends a percentage to protection, a percentage to growth, a percentage to lifestyle. Same income, completely different outcomes over 10 or 20 years. That is why you sometimes see a regular-looking family with a boring house and a boring car who ends up with millions by the time they retire. It is not vibes. It is systems. Let me give you a quick, simple example. Suppose you make $4,000 a month after tax. Most people let that whole amount land in one checking account, and then they just kind of hope they do better this month. A rich family blueprint would slice that same $4,000 into separate jobs. Maybe $300 goes automatically to an emergency fund, $300 to investments, a small chunk to long-term goals, and the rest to bills and fun. You do that for 1 month, and nothing really changes. You do that for 5 years, and your life is unrecognizable. And here is the wild part. You do not even need huge percentages at the start. If you just took 10% of your take-home and sent it to your future automatically, that is $400 a month in this example. Over a year, that is $4,800. Over 3 years, that is more than $14,000 before any growth. Now add in even a normal investment return, and suddenly that tiny 10% is doing more work for you than your second job. This is the moment the blueprint flips from fragile to powerful. Now, before we go deeper into how rich families allocate money, quick pause. If you are already getting ideas, or maybe feeling a little called out, in a good way, hit subscribe and like so this kind of content keeps showing up for you. It really helps keep the channel going, so I can keep breaking down money in a way that actually makes sense. Okay, let us get back into it, because the next part of the blueprint is where most people completely misprioritize. After the system mindset, the next piece is protection first, opportunity second. Most people do the opposite. They hear about investing, crypto, options, whatever the hot thing is this year, and they jump into a growth while their entire financial life is one flat tire away from disaster. Rich families quietly play a different game. Their first goal is not to get rich quickly. It is to become hard to knock over. Only then do they start taking bigger swings. Think about your money like a house. If the foundation is cracked, it does not matter how fancy the kitchen is, the whole thing is unstable. For money, that foundation is an emergency buffer, manageable debt, and some basic protections like insurance and a will. Not glamorous, I know, but rich families treat these boring things like non-negotiable infrastructure. They know that if every surprise turns into a credit card balance, their wealth factory is leaking from the bottom. Now here is how that looks in real life. Let us say you are starting at zero, maybe with some debt. The blueprint is not invest as much as possible right away. The blueprint is get 1 month of bare-bones expenses in cash as fast as you reasonably can. If your real-life costs are $3,000 a month, bare bones might be $2,000. So your first little checkpoint is $2,000 sitting in a boring savings account, whose only job is to keep you out of panic. Once you have that, you slowly push to 3 months, then eventually to 6. You do not need to build it all in 1 year. You might be adding $100 or $200 a month at first. That is fine, because every month that buffer grows, your stress shrinks. And when your stress shrinks, you stop making terrible, expensive decisions from panic. That alone can be worth tens of thousands of dollars over a decade, just from avoiding mistakes. At the same time, rich families are brutal about high-interest debt. Not all debt, not automatically, but the kind that quietly eats your future. If you are paying 19% on a credit card, that is not just a bill. That is a fire in the middle of your living room. The blueprint says keep investing small amounts to build the habit, but funnel extra energy into putting that fire out, because every dollar you free up from toxic interest becomes a permanent raise. You can redirect into your wealth factories. Okay, so you have a basic buffer and you are taming the worst debt. What happens next in the rich family blueprint is where things start to feel different. They stop thinking like individuals and start thinking like a small company. Companies have operating expenses, profit margins, reserves, and growth projects. In a rich family, every adult understands roughly how the money system works. There is a shared language, even if no one ever sits down and uses those fancy terms. Instead of, I hope there is money for this, it turns into, our monthly burn rate is about X, we invest Y, and we keep Z as dry powder. Translated into normal words, that just means they know how much it costs to be them, how much is being set aside for the future, and how much flexibility they actually have. That awareness alone is like switching the lights on in a room you have been walking through in the dark. Let us talk about investing, because this is where a lot of people imagine rich families are doing something super exotic. Secret hedge funds, insider tips, all that. There are always exceptions, but the quiet blueprint for most long-term wealth is surprisingly boring. They buy real assets that grow faster than inflation. They hold them for a long time, and they automate it so they are not relying on discipline every month. That is it. That is the secret. Imagine you put $300 a month into a broad, boring index fund that tracks the whole stock market. Do that for 10 years, and you have put in $36,000 of your own dollars. If the market earns an average return over that period, your account could easily be worth around $50,000 or more. Do it for 20 years, and the gap between what you put in and what you have becomes even more ridiculous. That gap is your money doing the work instead of you. Rich families start that process early, and they keep it running in the background no matter what the news says. That is another part of the blueprint. They do not let headlines control their wealth factory. Recession, election, market crash, whatever it is, the system keeps buying. When prices are down, they are quietly getting more ownership for the same monthly contribution. When prices are high, their existing assets have grown. Either way, the machine keeps humming. There is another layer in this blueprint that almost no one talks about, and it is probably the most powerful. Rich families use money to buy back future decisions. Here is what I mean. When you have no savings, no investments, and a pile of payments, every decision is about today. Can I get through this week, this month? When you have a buffer and growing investments, every dollar you save is really a vote for future flexibility. Flexibility for your kids, for your work, for your health, for where you live. For example, imagine your investments are spinning off just $300 a month in passive growth and income on average. That is like having a part-time worker in your family handing you $300 every month forever, as long as you respect the principle. The more you grow that machine, the more options you unlock. Eventually, if you keep going, your investments can cover big chunks of your core expenses. That is the point where people look at a rich family and say, they are just lucky. They are not seeing the 15 years of quiet blueprint following that made luck inevitable. Now, let us zoom into the psychology for a second, because this is where things either click or they do not. Poor and middle-income families are often trained, without even realizing it, to live in survival brain. Everything is urgent. Everything is about the next bill. The wealthy blueprint pulls you into what I call architect brain. Instead of asking, can I afford this? You start asking, where does this fit in the plan? Same purchase, completely different energy. In survival brain, getting a tax refund feels like winning the lottery and it usually disappears in a weekend. In architect brain, that same refund is already assigned. Maybe 30% to the emergency fund, 30% to investments, 10% to fun, the rest to knocking down a specific debt. You still get enjoyment, but now every unexpected dollar is also building your future scaffolding. Over a few years of doing this, opportunities that used to feel impossible start to show up. So how do you actually start using this blueprint without feeling overwhelmed? Let us make it simple. First, define your bare bones monthly number. Rent or mortgage, food, utilities, transportation, minimum payments. Not your dream life, just what it costs to keep the lights on. If that number is $2,500, write it down. That is your keep the ship afloat cost. Suddenly, you have something concrete to plan around instead of just vibes. Second, aim for that first 1-month buffer as your starting mission. If the goal is $2,500 and you can save $250 a month, you are 1/10 of the way there every month. That means roughly 10 months to hit your first checkpoint. But here is the kicker. As you get better at the system, you will probably find small ways to speed that up. Maybe you cut $50 of nonsense here, add a tiny side hustle there, and suddenly you're putting in $350 or $400 a month. Without changing your entire life, your timeline shrinks. Third, once that first month buffer is in place, you do two things at once. You keep adding slowly to the buffer, and you turn on a small automatic investment. Even if it is $50 a month, even if it feels embarrassingly small, it is critical because identity-wise, you want to become the kind of person who invests every month, not the kind of person who will invest when things calm down. Things never just calm down. You create the calm by starting anyway. Here's a little mental trick rich families use without saying it out loud. Every time their income goes up, they treat the extra like it barely exists. If they get a raise of $500 a month, they might allow themselves $100 for lifestyle and send the other $400 straight into the system. That one decision, repeated over a career, is the difference between someone who always feels a little tight and someone whose net worth quietly explodes in the background. Let us do some napkin math on that. Imagine you start doing this at age 28, and every year your income grows a bit. On average, you manage to increase your investing and saving by just $150 a month each year, either from raises or from trimming waste. That does not feel like much in any single year. But over 10 years, you have progressively ramped from maybe $50 a month invested to well over $1,000. The early dollars have been compounding the entire time. By your late 30s, you are not just catching up, you are building real multi-six-figure traction. Now, another quiet part of the rich family blueprint is how they think about kids and partners. In a lot of families, money is a source of tension, secrets, or silence. In wealthy families, money becomes a shared game. Kids see their parents talking about trade-offs, about saving for future goals, about why they are saying no to certain things now because they want something bigger later. They do not get every toy they ask for, but they are being given something more valuable, a mental model. If you grew up in a family where money was stressful or never talked about, this might feel completely foreign. That is okay. You can start the blueprint with yourself. One simple habit is to do a 10-minute money meeting with yourself once a week. Look at what came in, what went out, what went to the future, and what you want to adjust. You do not need a spreadsheet with 50 categories, just 3 questions. What worked? What hurt? What do I want to change next week? Repeating that small review builds more awareness than any budgeting app alone. Rich families also understand something subtle about lifestyle creep. Lifestyle upgrades feel great in the moment, but they almost never make you as happy as you think they will for as long as you imagine. The fancy car, the bigger house, the constant new gadgets, they all become normal shockingly fast. The blueprint answer is not to live like a monk forever. It is to delay big lifestyle jumps until your wealth factory can easily support them. That way, your upgrades are funded by your assets, not your future stress. Here is a really powerful filter you can steal. Before saying yes to any big expense, ask, will this make future me more free, more stuck, or neutral? Some things that cost money actually increase future freedom. Education that increases your earning power, moving closer to work so you get time back, buying tools that help you start a side business. Other things are just shiny handcuffs. They look nice, but they lock in higher monthly costs for years. The rich family blueprint says, stack freedom purchases early, luxury purchases later. We also have to talk about taxes for a second because this is a huge, quiet lever. Rich families obsess over after-tax money, not just pre-tax salary. They use retirement accounts, employer matches, and legal deductions to make sure more of what they earn stays in their ecosystem. You might not have access to everything they do, but chances are there are at least one or two tax-advantaged accounts you are not using to their full potential. Every dollar you legally keep from taxes is a dollar that can go to your future instead of disappearing. Even if you just take advantage of a basic employer retirement match, that is essentially free money added to your wealth factory. If your employer will match up to 3% and you are not contributing at least that much, you are literally refusing part of your paycheck. Turning that on and forgetting about it is one of the lowest effort, highest return moves you can possibly make. Over 15 or 20 years, that alone can turn into a six-figure difference in your net worth. Another piece of the blueprint is that rich families are not afraid to be boring for a surprisingly long time. In a world where everyone is chasing the next exciting thing, they are perfectly comfortable doing the same simple money moves month after month: automated investing, periodic rebalancing, gradually increasing contributions, avoiding outrageously dumb risks. That boredom is their competitive advantage. While everyone else burns energy chasing shortcuts, they let time and compounding carry the heavy load. This does not mean they never take risk. It means their risk is layered on top of a solid base, not instead of one. Maybe they put a small percentage of their net worth into a higher risk venture or business idea. If it works, great, that accelerates things. If it fails, their core plan is unaffected. For most families, the mistake is flipping this. They have no foundation, and then they roll the dice on something huge to get ahead. And if it goes badly, they are set back 5 or 10 years. So where does all of this leave you right now, listening to this? Maybe you feel behind. Maybe you have made some money mistakes. Maybe you have started and fallen off 3 different times. I want you to hear this clearly. Rich families do not have perfect histories. What they do have is a decision point where they stopped letting the past write the script and started following a blueprint on purpose. Your decision point can be today. Not in January, not when the debt is gone, not when you feel ready. Today. If you remember nothing else from this video, remember this: wealth is not a personality trait. It is a set of boring behaviors repeated for a surprisingly long time. Protect first so you are hard to knock over. Systematize your money so it flows to the right places automatically. Invest in simple, real assets on a schedule you can actually stick to. Use raises and windfalls to accelerate the process instead of inflate your lifestyle. Talk about money like a shared project instead of a source of shame. Over the next few years, if you keep coming back to this blueprint and applying it, your life will start to feel different. You will notice you are less stressed when your car needs a repair. You will see your